Hello, everybody. Old Buck Dave back again with, I believe, episode 161. We'll find out later if that's really the episode, but it's good to be here again. And of course, with me is none other than
Old Buck Dale.
Old Buck Dale. How you doing, buddy?
Good to be back with you.
What's new in your world?
Well, I had a little bit of a chuckle the other day, and the next time I saw you, I was going to tell you this story. I think it might even be a little challenge to Old Buck Terrier. We're still in touch with Old Buck Terrier, aren't we?
We are. Yeah.
So the other day I was cleaning up my glasses drawer, because I've worn glasses since I was 10. And then recently, then I finally got my eyes fixed at 77. So I don't need all those glasses, but I had a bunch of those frames around and some other things. And I was going through them and I said, boy, I was about ready to discard them or donate them. And then I ran across some clip-ons, some nice, decent sunglass clip-ons that I had. And I said, I wonder if I could take the frames out of these old clip-ons and fit them into some of these nice frames that I have that used to have prescription lenses.
Okay, so you're in MacGyver mode now.
I'm in my MacGyver mode. You know how I sit down. First thing I do with a new watch is take it apart.
Yeah. Let's take it apart.
So I took them apart. I took them all apart and very neatly keep them in all the little screws bouncing all over the place. But I have a drawer full of them. So I got this thing all apart and then I matched them up and I marked them with a knife and cut them down and trimmed them on. And sure enough, I made myself a couple nice pair of sunglasses with good lenses out of those old clip-ons. So I thought maybe I'd issue a challenge to Terry to go ahead and build himself some sunglasses.
Yeah, he could.
Or go to the dollar store and buy a pair. What the heck?
He'll probably build a machine to make the glasses. Anyway.
What old men do with too much time.
That's what old men do. Listen, I want to just jump in here, talk about a couple letters from afar that we got, and then we're going to jump into the real reason we're here today. I got two listeners wrote in to say that they liked the Bob Dylan song Forever Young that I stuck in as kind of a bonus track at the end of the show notes. This was the slow version, so you could actually listen and hear the actual words, which was nice. So they both liked it. And one of them even said, this is a shocker, I never knew that there were notes if you scrolled down. Never knew they were there. I think somebody else had that.
Yeah, I told you that about epiphany, a year ago.
Yeah.
I didn't know you wrote all that stuff on the bottom of that.
Of course, we had one listener back then that said, hey, sometime the show notes are better than the podcast. So,
yeah. So,
but hey, but the good news is we're going to have a good podcast today because we have a special guest. And our special guest is Agnes Schipper. Okay. And she's going to be here in a minute talking about her book, Sabine's Odyssey, a hidden child and her Dutch rescuers. Let me tell you a little bit about Agnes. She's the daughter of a hidden child and who was a member of the Dutch resistance, who helped save her mother from the Holocaust. Born in New York City, Agnes was raised a Catholic, the faith of her parents, and first learned about her mother's hidden Jewish ancestry when she was 20. Agnes had a career as a newspaper reporter and editor, and later as an attorney. Retirement allowed her to take the time to research and write about her parents' remarkable story. The mother of 4 and grandmother of 5, Agnes lives in Sarasota, Florida. That's like right here. So welcome, Agnes.
Thank you.
We're so tickled to have you here today. We ran into Agnes at the bookstore a number of weeks ago and started up a little chat, and we're fascinated by her story and the book. And we thought, more people need to hear this. So here we are. And so let's just start off a little. Agnes, I told like the 10-second version of your story. Tell us the general story of this memoir.
Well, it's memoir is about several odysseys, and the first one being, of course, how my mother survived World War II as a hidden child in the Netherlands. She was moved to 9 different locations for her safety by her rescuers, who were brave members of the Dutch resistance. And the second is the Odyssey of my mother's search for war records about her brother, Andreas, who died in a concentration camp. And finally, my own search into a heritage that was, as you already mentioned, hidden from me until I was 20, namely the Jewish ancestry of my mother's family, and then for more war records after my mother's death in 2017. So that's kind of basically the summary of the Odysseys.
And what I learned into looking into this, well, I guess it's at the back of your book, is this book is really one part of a 3-part saga that you're putting together. One is kind of pre-war, and then the other one will be kind of moving forward after where the book ends. Is that correct?
Yeah, how you put your life together after you've been stripped of your citizenship and everything you own and know. So how do you rebuild your life after that?
Yeah. So your mother now is it Sabine or Sabina? I've heard it pronounced both ways. Sabine. Okay, we'll go with Sabine. So Dale, you were right and I was wrong. Okay, once again. So your mother started this research, and and eventually it became this book. Now, when she started doing the research, was it just to fill in the gaps in family history, find more about what happened to her brother Andreas, or did she say, I'm going to publish this story someday?
Oh, I don't think she really thought about publishing a book. Her search was really to fill the holes in her family history, and especially what happened to her brother. Mm-hmm. But she also wanted the story preserved, mainly for her children and her grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you stepped into the picture and began working with your mother.
Correct.
And then, of course, your mother passed away, sadly. But you maintained that you kept doing the research. So when did she start beginning the research on this, and when did you jump in, and when did it finally end to the point where, okay, now I've got a book here to publish?
Well, I think she started it after her mother passed away. Her mother made her promise not to tell anyone about the Jewish background because it had caused so much sadness in the family. So after her mother passed away is when she really started researching and digging and writing a way to try to find information. And then she invited me to go with her to visit the Mauthausen concentration camp, which is in Austria, in a quarry in Austria. And that's really when I didn't have any kids. I wasn't working. I had free time to actually talk to her and interview her in depth. And that kind of was back in 1998. So over the years, when I visited them in New Jersey, my parents lived in New Jersey, my mother and father, I would just try to get more details and interview them. My mother was willing to talk. My father was not very willing to talk about his war experiences. So you had to slowly pry them out of him. Mm-hmm. So I put the information together, and of course, when I retired, I finally had the time to really devote more to research. And then during the COVID, so I started writing it in 1998, and then during COVID, when everything else stopped, I had no more excuses. So I finally finished the book in 2021 during the pandemic.
Okay, so your mother started sometime before that, and of course,
yes.
And then you picked it up in 98, or it may be before 98 even, when you were first talking to your mother about it. But so that's quite an odyssey in itself.
It's been a long time in coming.
Yeah. Now, something you alluded to here in just what you were just saying, Sabine was raised a Catholic. But she found out when she was 20 that she had Jewish roots. So why was she raised?
Found out.
You found out when you
Correct.
were 20 that she had Jewish roots.
Yeah.
So tell us the story there on why this happened. Why was she? Why was her family Catholic? And when did they convert to Catholicism? And little bit about that.
Well, Sabine's mother was the one who converted to Catholicism in the 1920s. So this was before the rise of Hitler. And she did that at the urging of her best friend. So she raised Sabine and her brother Andreas as Catholics. Her father, George, didn't practice any religion. Sabine learned that she was somehow different from her Christian friends when her brother Andreas was not allowed to join the Hitler Youth. He so much wanted to wear the Hitler Youth uniform like all of his friends, but under Nazi racial rules, he was Jewish because he had Jewish grandparents, and only Aryans were allowed to join the Hitler Youth. So this was around 1934-35 when Sabine was only 8 years old. She really had no understanding of what Judaism was or what her Jewish roots were, just that she was somehow different.
Somehow different.
Yeah, she only had one grandparent alive, Edith's mother, Margarethe, who didn't practice Judaism. And in fact, Margarethe had registered Edith as Protestant in birth records. Germans required registration of religion with the birth records.
Okay, but her birth records would have said she's Catholic, correct?
I believe so. I've never seen her birth certificate, so that's a very good question. Probably it may have been, depending on when her mother converted from Protestant to Catholic. But my mother only knew Catholicism growing up, so probably registered as a Catholic.
Okay, but so how did the Nazis figure out who was Jewish and who wasn't Jewish, and how did they define Jewish? And you know, I guess a lot of people like Sabine were kind of surprised, I guess, in a way to find out.
That's true, and it's a good question because people are often puzzled why my mother's family was persecuted because by religion they were Catholics. However, the Nazis classified anyone who had 3 or more Jewish grandparents as Jewish, regardless of religion. The Nazis considered white, non-Jewish North Europeans as the superior or master race and Jews as an inferior race. So in 1933, they enacted the Nuremberg laws, which are called, and I quote, laws for the protection of German blood and German honor. And those laws defined who was a full Jew, part Jew, and Mischling. That is kind of mixed race. And then how did they decide? That was the second part of your question. Who was Jewish and who wasn't? Well, they had those birth, marriage, and death records, census records. They also had access to records of synagogues and parishes for those converted Jews. And then they also developed this pseudoscience based on the racial stereotypes with charts to determine who had, quote, Jewish racial characteristics, such as nose size, eye color, hair texture, skin type. I know it sounds absurd now, but it was taken seriously back then.
Yeah, wasn't that basically that theory was founded by an American, I believe, and the Nazis tapped his quote findings?
That could be. I can't say I've researched that in detail, but it was a complete pseudoscience. My grandmother had blue eyes. My mother had hazel eyes. It was ridiculous, actually. But also, if your neighbor didn't like you, they could claim that you were Jewish. So those were the main ways that they.
Okay, but now did the Nazis, have a cadre of people going through all the records, or did they tell the local governments that you had to do this and this and this and dig into your documents and come up with a list?
Those records were easily accessible by the municipal and civil authorities because every time you moved, you had to register. And, the churches and the synagogues and all the census records contained that information. So it wasn't that difficult for them to determine. It was based strictly on bloodlines. If you had 3 or more Jewish grandparents, you were essentially doomed.
And maybe I'm going down a rabbit hole here, so you can stop me if I. But but how did they define Jewishness? I mean, it's really more. Is it because they didn't have DNA testing?
No, they didn't. And I've often wondered if DNA was available, would they have discovered that many more people had Jewish blood and they'd have
Right.
to wipe out
Yeah.
most of their population?
Yeah.
Or would have made it easier? It's a interesting thing to speculate about. But
Yeah.
I often thought it was probably sort of like a record thing at first, the obvious, the synagogue records or something. But I think after a while, they didn't care. There was everybody and anybody. Once they reached a certain point of going down this road, I thought it, because there's just a number of people that fell victim, and that net that they cast. I mean, which I think part of Agnes's adventure was trying to find the records on her mother's brother.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was really a lot of the crux of your research, wasn't it?
It was, and it took years. You
Mhm.
get so far, and then you follow up, and then you write, and you get more. And as late as this summer, I've learned even more, even after the book was published. So,
correct me if I'm wrong, but she was a small girl. Was it Bremen, Germany?
Breslau.
Breslau. Excuse me.
Breslau.
I missed that one. I didn't take very good notes.
Yeah, it's now been partitioned off to Poland, so it's now Wrocław.
Ah, okay. Well, tell us a little bit about family life in Breslau when she was a little girl, and what kind of life she lived there. And tell us a little bit about when her parents decided it was time to leave Germany, because different people chose different times to say, "Oh, it's time to get out."
Yeah. Well, she had a very happy memories of her childhood. Her father was a very successful lawyer. Her mother was the daughter of a surgeon, so probably upper middle class people. So she went to private schools. She had music lessons, dance lessons. They went on vacations to the North Sea, to the Alps. So they had a very comfortable middle class life. And even in the 1930s, when these restrictions started becoming enacted, my grandfather, who was a World War I German veteran, a decorated German veteran, and a real patriot, he managed to continue practicing law, but had to have his junior associates sign any papers that were filed with the court. So they, in the 30s, when a lot of people started leaving, including Edith's two brothers, he stuck on there, part because he thought he could outlive the Nazis. He thought this was a temporary phase.
I'm a war hero. I'm a famous guy. I'm a bright guy.
Exactly right. Who would, in their right mind, think that your own country would hunt to kill its own veterans? I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
Who would have even conceived of that?
Yeah.
In the 1930s. And the other practical reason is law is not a portable profession. How would he support his family if he left?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And he really they did not decide to leave until Kristallnacht. Are you familiar with that?
I am, but go ahead. Tell us a little bit about that for our listeners. Everybody may not be on the same page. So
Kristallnacht is called the Night of Broken Glass. It was November 9th to 10th in 1938, when Nazis rampaged throughout the country, including parts of Austria, destroying hundreds of synagogues, some 7,500 Jewish businesses, and arrested some 30,000 men just for being Jewish. My mother termed Kristallnacht as my grandfather's wake-up call. And that is when they finally decided there was no future for the family in Germany. George and Edith, those are the parents, evacuated Sabine and her brother initially to England. And after they were safe, they finished dismantling their properties and George's law practice. And then they applied for US visas, stored what they could in a warehouse, for shipment to the United States. And then they went to Netherlands to await the visas. They had their children join them just for the summer vacation in the Netherlands. And unfortunately, the whole family became trapped there when war broke out on September 1st, 1939.
So they applied for U.S. visas. Father applied for visas for the family, and he probably assumed he would get them boom like that, and didn't happen.
Well, he had two brothers-in-law there, one of whom was a very well-known surgeon who vouched for them. It wasn't as if they were going to become dependent.
Not going to be wards of the state, right?
But they could not get visas. Actually, the Frank family also, Anne Frank's family, also applied for visas and were unable to get them. It was very difficult.
So okay, they went to Holland, right? They went to Holland first, waiting for the visas.
Yes, exactly, and had the children come.
And they had the children, but at some point they separated from the children. And why was that?
They separated from the children after Andreas was taken away. And they had to go into hiding, and it was safer to split up in the hiding years.
Okay.
And except for the last few months, they were hidden separately.
Tell us a little bit more about her brother, Andreas, and what happened to him. This is kind of the saddest part of the whole story, really.
It is. Well, Andreas was Sabine's only sibling. They had very close relationship. He was very protective of her. He was about 6 years older than her. He was sweet, shy, and quite religious, and hoped to become a Catholic priest. And in England, he had attended a pre-seminary school. Andreas was picked up by agents for the Gestapo on June 11th, 1941, one of about 300 young Jewish men rounded up that day in retaliation for a Dutch act of sabotage. And he was murdered 4 months later, along with most of the other young men arrested in Mauthausen, which was located in a quarry in Austria. So I do warn people, the chapters about Mauthausen, and it's a lesser known concentration camp, but a truly brutal one.
Yeah, that's like chapter
to read.
Chapter 3,
tough to
4,
read.
Tough read,
Yeah.
Exactly. And you warned. I mean, you say at the beginning of the book.
I warned you, but stick with it, because the book does lighten up. It has a love story and a happy ending for Sabine and her parents.
Yeah, we're going to get into that shortly here. Let me ask a couple other questions. Now Sabine ended up, being everywhere. Tell us a little bit about how she went, where she went into hiding on her own.
Okay.
And she had to move several times for different reasons, I guess. But generally, the Nazis were close by was the reason. So tell us a little bit about her hiding places and her experiences. Some very nice, some not so nice.
Correct. Well, I counted about 10 hiding places, which really started with an alcove in her own apartment in Amsterdam. But of course, I can't go into details of all the places. She was 12 when the war started and spent most of her teen years in hiding. And as you mentioned, her experiences were mixed. Some who hid her were very kind, and others exploited her essentially for free labor.
She was cheap labor.
Cheap labor, and one place she was sexually assaulted. Yeah. So, I mean, she was hidden in a convent, in the Amsterdam attic of a teacher, in a farmhouse, above a bicycle repair shop, and in the homes of a stonemason, a school principal, a carpenter, and small grocer, and lastly, in the home of a small town mayor, where she was reunited with her parents. And for each, she had to have several false identities created, because when she initially registered, you got an ID card with a big J, identifying you as Jewish and also as a buitenlander, a foreigner. So they had to create new names and new IDs. And then for every ID, she had to memorize the whole backstory. So just as an example, her first idea was as Liesje Schmidt, born in the Dutch East Indies, that's now Indonesia, whose mother was visiting relatives in England and had left her with Belgian friends when the war broke out. And there was a whole backstory. So you can imagine being quizzed on where you're born and who your parents are and who your relatives are. And she had to do that multiple times in her in her 3 years of hiding.
And this is a young
really,
girl. This is not an adult.
No. But by the time the war was over, she had turned 18. So her survival was really a matter of small miracles and luck, and also that the resistance moved her out of Amsterdam, which became a very dangerous place, as the Frank family found out, and found her hiding places in the countryside, which were somewhat safer.
Safer in the countryside, yeah.
When I was reading the book, I thought Agnes, the effort that you were putting into to track down your mother's brother, I thought that was, writing to people, and there's still some people that had monitored these stuffs, and there's some people that have saved some of these records, and they did try to preserve some of the records so that people could know what happened to their relatives. I thought that part of your research and stuff would have been absolutely, it would have been a real adventure, but also quite troubling to see all this, unfold, and writing the letters and waiting for replies, and then finally verifying on a list this was your mother's brother who passed and when he was killed. Which brought me to the question that I'm always curious: why did the Germans even bother to keep all those meticulous records? Why did they go to all that trouble?
They were Germans.
And I thought that would be the answer. Honest, I figured that would be the answer. That's the way they were.
It's called one of the best documented genocides in history. I think initially they were proud they were going to create a master race. But then when they started losing the war, of course, they started destroying evidence, and bombing some of the gas chambers. But prisoners who survived were able to testify, and some of them hid or copied records for the Allies so they could be prosecuted. The Nazis could be prosecuted later.
Oh, I have another question about her identities.
Yes.
Now, were these supplied by the Dutch resistance or the British, or is this something that the family had to do on their own to create these false identities?
The first one was created by a friend of the family, and the later ones were created by the Dutch resistance. So friends of families would help them create a new story and have these false IDs created. When I say sometimes it's a matter of luck, my mother's best friend was the daughter of a man who owned a printing press. So he could print up some of these falsified documents and IDs. And later on, when she was in the countryside, the resistance created. The mayor of the small town created her last false ID.
The mayor of the town did it.
The last town, he had that done, of the last town where they were hidden before Liberation Day.
Parts of the book are pretty tough to read, particularly at the beginning. But there's one particular episode when she's staying with the Bosch family. I believe that was the last family she stayed with.
I was the sixth.
Oh, six, excuse me.
The sixth out of 9.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. See. Okay. But anyway, it was a Bosch family. Now, was this a family in rural Netherlands?
It was in a small town in North Holland.
All right. Yes. I got that part right. Okay. And one day she thought that a man had come to the house, and she thought he had come to arrest her. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And if you have a passage that you can read concerning that, I think that's a very interesting part of this story.
Okay, well, just let me give you a little the background. As you said, the scene takes place in the 6th hiding place in the Dutch countryside in 1944, where she was working as a nanny for the family of Dr. Bosch. And she was living then under the false name and ID of Sophie Fredericks, whose nickname was Fietje. 3 years earlier, 2 young plainclothes Dutchmen had come to her apartment in Amsterdam and asked for her brother by name. And they looked about her brother's age, and she assumed that they were fellow members of a church acolyte group that her brother belonged to. And she innocently assisted the young men in locating her brother in the apartment building next door. And they turned out to be Dutch policemen working for the Gestapo. So if you know that background, that'll help with the passage. One afternoon, a handsome, tall young man rang the doorbell at the Bosch home. As was typical for Northern Dutch, he was blonde-haired and blue-eyed. He was dressed in a trench coat and wore a felt hat. Mrs. Bosch opened the door. The man did not identify himself. He asked about the identity card for Fietsje. Sabine was terrified that the man had come to arrest her. She thought he was a Dutch police detective working for the Gestapo, and she panicked. She assumed that her parents had been arrested, and now it was her turn, and that Dr. Bosch would be next for hiding her. Mrs. Bosch was frightened too. She told the young man that he had better wait until her husband came home. Mrs. Bosch then told Sabine, "I'm afraid they have found you," and instructed her to wait in the room next door. Shortly afterwards, Dr. Bosch came home. He walked into the room where the young man was waiting and said, "Goeiedag, meneer Schipper." "Good day, Mr. Schipper." Dr. Bosch knew the young man. He was Cornelis Nicholas Schipper, his namesake uncle, Oom Cor Schipper, who had visited Sabine at the Vleugels and moved her to the Bosch home, had sent his nephew to write down the number on Sabine's false identity card to help the resistance obtain more ration cards for her. Oom Cor had recruited his nephew into the resistance. And that's how my parents met. A nice way to get acquainted, don't you think? We had been scared silly, my Sabine later wrote to her uncles. And she was 17, dark-haired and hazel-eyed, an exotic beauty for that part of the blonde world. He was 26 and became smitten. So I love how you met stories, and I think that one is
that's just, boy. It just warms your heart when you think about how that happened.
Talking about this book, it is for our listeners, it is a book, and you can buy it and you can find it. I enjoy the way it was written, and I just sort of traveled along with with what it would take to do something like this and put that together. The research, and I assumed, I felt that you got to be close to your mother with this, Agnes.
Yes, yeah. It was a labor of love.
Yeah, a bonding experience. I mean, considering all the tragedies that she had gone through, but I mean, to have a parent that you could do such a mission like this must have been really a blessing to you, to put it any other way, I think. So other than that, I found the book compelling. It's a good read for those who follow history and stuff. Just a quick question. Did you ever read The Tattooist of Auschwitz?
I did. I've
did?
read that.
Okay.
There are a lot of amazing stories, and I think they all need to be saved.
Right.
And documented in case people deny such a horrible thing happened in the future.
I think what you just said is very important. I mean, people could say, well, here's another Holocaust story, but everyone's important. Everyone's important.
I agree. And
I enjoyed the book, and I would recommend it to anybody who follows history and wants to, if they enjoyed The Tattooist of Auschwitz, and several of my friends read that, and I would say pick this one up as you can. It's a good read.
It's kind of like the Anne Frank story, except she survived. It's very similar.
Yeah, and as far as the writing of the story itself, clearly the person that wrote this was a journalist and a lawyer.
Yeah. We should add that too.
Because I was reading it, and I'm calling Dale and saying, boy, the writing is meticulous, the research is meticulous, it's clear. It's you can tell you really put a lot of effort into this, and it's
well. Thank you very much.
It really is. It really is a labor of love.
And just a quick plug: all you have to do is Google Sabine's Odyssey, and it'll pop up. Links will pop up, so it's pretty easy to find. Plus, as you know, it's at our local bookstore.
It's at our local bookstore, Bookstore One, and we have show notes that we talked about at the beginning of the show here, and I'll put links in the show notes to the book, and so people will know where they can get it, the different ways you can get it. You can get it either get it paperback, or you can get it electronic. So it's easy to get to, and it's a beautiful cover, actually. It's if you want to tell us about the cover.
Well, that actually is the story I talked about, is the first awareness that my mother had and Andreas, her brother, had, that they were different from their Christian friends, was when he couldn't join the Hitler Youth. So my grandmother arranged for him to join a kind of religious scout troop that also had a uniform.
So he's got his
And he's
uniform.
very, very proud to wear the uniform, and he's standing with his sister. So that's the cover of the book.
And she's got her little
She's got her little braids and
loop
bows.
braids. Yeah, yeah. And there's some, and there's also a nice collection of pictures in the middle of the book, historical pictures of the family. So I will say thank you, Agnes.
And I'll say thank you to the two old bucks.
For the two old bucks.
For this opportunity. You really are nice guys, and I think I'm going to become a regular listener.
All right. We're going to double our listenership here, Dale.
Having met Agnes in person, it's nice. It's just nice to meet authors, fascinating people. They can put all that down in paper and get something in print. I mean, it's just there's a lot of work and effort to do it, and it's fun for us. We were very, very pleased to have you with us today, and just nice to know you. I appreciate you stopping by. So,
well, thank you. Hope we run into each other again.
Well, in that case, I think Davis would probably say it's time for.
It sounds like a coffee. It sounds like a coffee date.
Call it a day. I was going to say, Old Buck Dale saying thanks for listening.
This is Old Buck Dave saying it's Sabine's Odyssey. We'll tell you where to buy it. Thank you very much, Agnes Schipper. This is Old Buck Dave saying bye-bye.
Bye-bye.